Hello, my fellow After Effects junkies. I'm Brandon Ray, but you can call me B-Ray. The effect I've got for you this week is called the Paper People effect. I call it that because it's the very effect I use to give my show, Paper People Jokes, its stylistic flair. I'm assuming most of you have probably never seen my weekly show, Paper People Jokes. So, I'll tell you what effect it's done in. It's supposed to emulate the classical construction paper cutout animation stop motion effect. And with this little tutorial I'm going to show you this week, hopefully you'll be able to do it in a lot faster amount of time than you would if you did it the old classical way. Okay, we're going to start out with our new After Effects project and import all of our assets. My assets are the picture I'm going to rotoscope, audio file, and a paper texture. So next we'll make a composition. Width 1280, height 720, square pixels, and 15 frames a second. We're going to call it Jenny Face, because that's the name of the joke teller on this week's show, Jenny. So, next we'll drag our assets into the timeline of the composition. We're going to place the photograph on top with the paper texture beneath it. And next we're going to scale and reposition that photograph so it fills up the entire frame. Once we do that, we're going to go to the paper texture beneath it because this is what we're going to be using to rotoscope. And we're going to rename it Back of Face because the first layer we're going to cut out is going to be the back of Jenny's face. So we get the pen tool and we're going to make a rough outline around her face right here. You don't need to be detailed or precise, or you don't need to add curves to it. Part of this paper effect is kind of the rough quality of it right here. So we have this rough outline. Now we're going to make it wiggle as if it's being taken, it's a photo that's being taken pictures of several times. So we go to the position value, option click it to add an expression, and add the wiggle expression. This wiggle expression, I added wiggle parentheses 15, 3. That's going to shake it 15 times within a second on a value of 3. And basically, I'm adding this same expression to the brightness and contrast effect that I just applied to the layer. But there we go. You see, it gives it a little bit of a flicker and a little bit of movement. So now we're going to add a layer style, the drop shadow effect. Now this next phase, this isn't a necessary step, but it's going to be helpful for what we're trying to do here, because we're trying to isolate the different tones on Jenny's face, the different degrees of lightness and darkness. So I'm applying this cartoon effect to her photograph, because what that's going to help do is kind of give it a more vectorized look, where we have these flat planes of highlights, midtones, and darker zones. So it's just going to help me isolate those, because what I'm eventually going to do is, with this paper texture, cut out each of these highlights, midtones, and darker areas to give this paper effect to her face. So I added the brightness and contrast too. And now if we squint, we can definitely see the different zones within her face that are going to give her some... add some form to her face with these lights and darks. So you see, I just duplicated that back of the face layer, and I'm renaming it Face Darkest Zones. And to the brightness and contrast on this layer, I'm going to drop it, the brightness, all the way to negative 100%, because I want that to be really dark for these deep areas. And with the pen tool, I'm cutting out the darkest zones I see on her face. So there's that deep shadow under her cheek, kind of a little bit under her lip right there. And I'm going to do the same thing for this area around her eyes. After we do this, we're going to delete that first mask that was applied to this layer. And now all we've got are these darkest zones. Now that looks pretty nappy if we look at it just like that, but don't worry, it'll all make sense eventually. Next thing we're going to do is just basically repeat this same process. We're going to duplicate this layer, name it Face, Lightest Zone, and do the exact opposite of what we did before. Instead of cranking it down to negative 100, we're going to crank it up to about 100%. Or maybe not 100, more like 60. Now this is going to represent these light spots shining on her face, and it's going to help give her face depth and form in this two-dimensional style that we're doing. So now I'm going to duplicate the lightest zone layer I just made, and I'm going to rename it mid-zone, and I'm going to do the exact same process. It's going to be a little bit lighter than the base layer of the face, but not as light as the lightest one. So we're renaming it, and besides the areas on her face that I see that need a little bit more form, like say her right cheek, I'm also pretty much just going to outline around the general zone of those light zones. So I make kind of a gradient effect around the light highlighted area. Well, this still doesn't resemble Ginny very much, but trust me, we're getting closer. Okay, I've just made the midtones, and I'm thinking that we should get rid of the drop shadow behind the light zone, and maybe even the midtone zone, because I think that's going to make the gradient of those paper textures look a little bit more natural. Next, we're going to duplicate the darkest zone layer, because we're going to start making her eyes, and that darkest zone layer that we've already made is pretty close color to the dark spots on her eyes. And we're going to start out by doing the pupils, and then we'll do her eyelashes, and here's the pupil right here. So, and we're going to label the layer pupils, just so we can keep track of it. Next, we'll duplicate that layer again. We're going to do the same thing for the eyelashes. And remember, each time you duplicate a layer, it's really important to delete the masks that come on that duplicated layer. For example, say we duplicate these eyebrows that we just made. Well, the next layer that we start drawing a mask on is going to have those eyebrow masks as well. So we need to go through and clean up and delete the old masks on the layers that we just duplicated. So we're doing the same for the whites of the eyes, except on the whites of the eyes, we're going to go into the brightness and contrast and just crank the brightness up to 100% even, all the way, because we want it to be really white. So now we have 4 components of the eyes, and this is pretty much going to make up our eyes right here. We're going to readjust the brightness and the contrast of these so that the pupils are darker and the eyelashes are darker, and even so the eyebrows are a little bit darker too. And once we've got all these ready, we're going to select all 4 of them and do Shift Apple C. That's going to make a pre-composition. We're going to name this pre-composition Eyes. So we've got these 4 layers in this new composition. We're going to go change the duration of the composition to only 5 frames. So what we're going to do is on each different frame, we're going to have a different eyeball expression for Ginny. And I'm thinking on this first frame, we're going to have some closed eyes. And so because these eyes are going to be closed, for this first frame, we're going to draw back the beginnings of the layers of the pupil and the whites of the eyes and drag them to the next frame. So we don't want them on that first frame. We want our eyes to appear closed, so they'll just be the lashes and the brows. And we're going to change the position a little bit. And remember, one thing that's really important throughout the entire duration of this whole process is whenever we're applying keyframes, we want to toggle on the hold keyframe. They have to be hold keyframes because that way it's not going to do in-between interpolations. And it's going to give us more of that jerky stop-motion effect that we're trying to go for. Okay, what I'm doing right here is I'm applying the puppet effect to the eyelashes. And like I said, we're going to apply hold keyframes to them. But what the puppet effect is going to do is it's going to make it really easy for us to reshape these eyelashes to different positions for these different frames. So instead of redrawing the mask for each of these, all we have to do is add these puppet points. One at the beginning of the eyelash, one at the end, and one in the middle, and then raise that middle one up so we can change the arc of the eyelashes. So she has more a surprised expression, for example. The eyes are opened wider, and consecutively we'll just raise up those eyebrows a little bit as well. So now we've got 3 different unique eyeball positions for her. So we're going to go back into our main composition, and we're going to apply some time remapping. And then immediately you see the first thing I do is I toggled the hold keyframes onto those keyframe values. What this is going to do for us, and this is really helpful, is it's going to give us the option of, by changing the keyframe value of what keyframe we want that layer to be on, it's going to change the eyeball value. Whereas on frame 0, the eye's closed. Frame 1, it's slightly opened, and on frame 2, it's all the way opened. And what I'm just going to do right here real fast is just this random mishmash of eyes opened wide, closing, basically just having her blinking a lot because it's going to add a little bit more life to her. Okay, so the eyes are done the way we want them to be. Now we need to add the mouth. I'm just going to duplicate one of those layers and name it mouth hole, and delete the previous masks, and then I'm going to go into the brightness and contrast and bring that brightness all the way down. And so we're going to look at this picture of Jenny, and we're going to copy the general shape of her mouth, the darkness in her mouth. And now that we've done that, we'll just duplicate that same mouth hole layer, and we'll add a mask that's the top lip, and we'll do the same and add a mask for the bottom lip. So now we've got some lips cut out, and we're going to go add a hue saturation effect so we can change the hue of these and make them a little bit more red, and change the brightness and contrast too so they look a little bit more like lips. Okay. So right now I'm taking that darkest zone, I'm going to duplicate it and rename it Dark Things for... Gosh, I need to think of a better name than that, but what I mean by that is some of the really dark areas that in the dark zones previously we didn't accentuate, like her nostrils, for example, the creases between her nose and her mouth. So, just one of the last stages to kind of add some depth and form to the shapes inside of her face. And I've decided to kill that drop shadow on the mid-tone layer. I think it looks better without it. So now we've got Jenny's basic face. I think she needs some hair. That'll help feminize her a little bit. So we're just going to go to that base layer, the back of face layer, the very first layer that we made, and we're going to duplicate it. Label it hair, and bring it all the way up to the top. We'll drop the brightness and the contrast, make it really dark, delete the original mask that's on it, and with the pen tool once again, we're going to cut her hair out. And finishing up looking at her face, I think I need to add an ear on her too. So I'm just going to that back of face layer, and with my pen tool, I'm going to add a little ear shape. And I think we're getting pretty close to having the basic shape of Jenny's paper peopleized face. Is we're going to take the composition that has Jenny's face that we've just made, and we're going to nest it inside of another composition. And you can do that by dragging it down just like I just did to that little icon right down there. And that drops your other composition into a new composition with the same properties. And we're going to take the pen tool and make a mask around the jaw portion of her face. And what's important when we're doing this is we want it to be just outlining right above her bottom lip. Okay, and we're going to duplicate this layer. And on the base layer, we're going to make it a subtractive mask. And on the top layer, it's an additive mask. Which means, see, well, I'll hide this top layer. And on the base layer, we're going to readjust these mask points. Give us a little bit more slack. So I'm going to go into one of our previous compositions, and I'm going to take that mouth hole layer that we made, copy it, and paste it into our current composition. And I'm going to adjust the mask points to where this mouth hole now is big enough when we move the top layer, the jaw around, this mouth hole is there. So yeah, it looks like we got enough slack right now. See how that's going to work? And we're going to use two effects that I find to be very fast and pretty effective for making things move around, like this jaw right here. We're going to use the puppet tool, and we're going to use the motion sketch. We're going to drag the audio track into this composition, line it up where Ginny's just about to start talking, where we want it to be, and then we will select that top layer, the one that's just the jaw. And selecting the puppet tool, we will apply some puppet points to this jaw. And I want to put one right at the top of her bottom lip. And we add two other puppet points on either side of her jaw to hold it into place. And you see when I move that central point up and down, it's going to stay in place for the most part, but it moves it up and down in a talking type motion. So now that we've got this set up, I'm going to hold down the Apple key while I click on one of these puppet points. You'll see this little stopwatch icon come up, and that is going to give me a real-time way of moving this point around. And what's great about this is since we have the audio track in this layer, we're hearing Ginny speak, we can move this puppet tool point up and down as her jaw should be moving up and down while we're listening to her words. Now we're going to do the same type of thing with the motion sketch tool. So I'm going to unselect the puppet tool and just use my regular selection tool, click on Start Capture for motion sketch, and move the layer up and down according to how it should with her voice. You see, we're real-time animating. And all we have to do is we have to select these hold keyframes. Select all the keyframes and toggle them to hold keyframes. And that's going to give us that jerkier type motion that's going to look a lot more like stop motion animation. So now that we got this looking pretty good, we're going to take this composition and, just like we did before, put it inside of another composition. And we're going to apply the same motion sketch effect that we just did to the jaw, to Ginny's whole face, because her face is going to bobble up and down when she talks a little bit. And so now, through real-time animating capabilities, and with the hold keyframes applied, we get this jerky stop motion type motion. And we animated it just within seconds. So now we're going to take a paper texture, put it in the background, stretch it out to where it fits the frame, and I'm going to apply a color balance HLS effect to it, just to change the color of this paper texture as the background from Ginny's face, so she stands out. And then we're going to apply some of the same techniques that we've applied to all the layers in Ginny's faces, which is the position value with the option clicked on the position stopwatch, so we can apply an expression, and we're going to apply that wiggle expression, which is wiggle, parentheses, 15, comma, 3, 5, whatever value you want. So it gives the position a wiggle, and we'll also apply that to the lightness on the color balance effect, so the lightness will flicker a little bit also. And now I'm just going to duplicate this layer, and with the pen tool, really quickly sketch out some words that Ginny's actually saying within the joke. And we're just going to sketch this out real quick and do the same type of stuff that we've done previously to all the other layers. We're going to change the color property of this layer. We're going to add a drop shadow layer style. And we'll just keep on doing that with all the rest of the words that are within the joke. I want to go back to something else real quick, though, because I think it would be beneficial at a few times, if not throughout the entire joke, to give Ginny some teeth. So we're going back to that composition that has Ginny's jaw, the second composition we made. And we're duplicating the mouth hole layer, and we're going to make the brightness all the way up to 100%, white for teeth. And with the pen tool, we're going to cut out some teeth. And then after we do this, we can use our own discretion about when she needs to show her teeth. I don't think they should be there throughout the whole time. But at least at the end when she's laughing, it'll be good to see those pearly white teeth flashing. Let's give it a preview, and with a few extra modifications, moving her face around the screen and maybe changing the colors of the background layer, here's what we have.
Hey, did you hear about the kidnapping on the bus? Yeah, the bus driver woke him up.
Now, just to recap on what's really essential about this effect, I think it boils down to a select few number of things. One, we want a composition with a frame rate of 15 frames per second. That's going to look more like stop motion. Two, we want to apply this wiggle expression to all position values of all of our paper texture pieces that we use to cut things out. Three, we're cutting things out with the pen tool. Four, we're affecting the brightness and contrast on every single piece of paper texture, and we're making it flicker, and that's giving us the effect of several photographs being taken, looking like stop motion. And then the real gem of the animation factor that's going on here is the puppet tool and the motion sketch tool. And that allows you to animate stuff really fast. And finally, whenever we're doing keyframe values, we're toggling on the hold keyframes. So, and that gives it that jerky motion that looks like stop motion. Oh, and also pre-composing is very important too, because we're going to deal with the more complicated the thing is that we're creating, the more layers they're going to be, and the only way we can keep track of them is nesting them inside other compositions. So if you do all these steps, there's basically an infinite number of possibilities that you can create on your own. Here's just a few examples of the stuff that I do in Paper People Jokes every week. So, if you like what you see here too, make sure to watch Paper People Jokes. There's a new joke out every Monday at www.paperpeoplejokes.com. Brandon Ray, signing out. Boom, 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 boom.